Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is the last event of the day. Here with us is Leopoldina Fortunati. She's a feminist theorist and author. She's dealt a lot with communication technologies, cultural researches, and also gender studies. So she did a lot of researches in these fields and wrote a lot of books. One of them is most well-known, The Arcane of Reproduction. She's also director of the PhD program at University of Udine. She will give us the lecture entitled Labor and Technology, Two Questions, Open Questions for Feminism. Thank you.
Thank you to you for the presentation, and also thank you for the invitation. This is working perfect. Okay. Allora, feminism. Open questions within the political organization. We have lack of continuity, failed handover to the follow generations of young women, lack of new technologies and technique for political communication. Open question within the social life. The political strategy to not struggle about housework failed. The political and social achievement that women gain with their struggles are always at risk to regress. And the women's body, we find ourselves with the women's body which has become the largest battlefield. Let us start about lack of continuity. Feminism has always risen in the form of political movement, not party, not stable organization. We have always have a growing phase, reaching the apex and then the reflux. We must deal with this because this is the history of feminism organization. Nevertheless, it has been extremely productive in terms of political creativity. Let us take, for example, the topic of leaderism. It was a very big debate about that, and inside the feminist movement, we were able to open a new way to look at the problem, at the old problem of power, outline another kind of notion, which is empowerment and empowering activities. Inside the feminist movement, for example, about leaderism, there was a lot of debate and the refusal to have leaders. But today, also in the social movements, this problem comes out often in older terms. Then they failed handover to the following generations. The daughter to become adults had to refuse mother's model, mother's political program, mother's view of society. And then in the following generation of women, there was a cultural and political misunderstanding. Improvement perceived by young women as reached and stable equality with men. This was for a long time a very bad misunderstanding that brought to the underdevelopment of feminist struggle. And then mothers' energy reserves at certain point have been exhausted. You cannot continue to struggle for all your life. We know from research on political movement that the engagement is temporary. You can be engaged for a certain number of years. You cannot do it for all your life. And this is the problem for which you need that there is somebody who picks up the question and go ahead. And hopefully new generation have to do that. Then one limit of the feminist movement, but also of autonomist movement, was the lack of new technologies and techniques of political communication. We could count only on mimograph, I don't know how it is pronounced, flyers, posters, microphone and megaphone. So very few and very basic technologies to enhance political communication. And I would like to underline technologies of writing and to amplify the voice within a limited distance, which was the distance inside a square, in a street, in a limited place. So at a certain point, these technologies show their limitation, and also, flyers, posters. People at a certain point, and women in particular, were bored about that. So also these this limitation at that moment contributed to the reflux of feminist movement. Open questions within the social life. So we said the prevailing political strategy to not struggle about the housework failed. What prevailed was in reality the Leninist strategy. A lot of women, without maybe have any awareness of that, followed this strategy to empower themselves through the labor for the market, so through the waged labor. As a social consequence, we had a moderate increase of the number of women with a paid work and the continuation of the double work, housework and work for the market. So essentially not a very big gain. Some modest success in the division of domestic labor with men. From all the research, it came out that men have improved a little bit in providing some housework, not so much. So very far away for half and half. The political and social achievement always at risk. Social and economic indicators regarding women are not so exciting. Then crisis. Who paid for the crisis? First of all, women. Women continue to work more than men and earn less, although some improvements have to be noticed also about that. Then a dramatic lack of policy and union representation. It depends from country to country, but for example, in Italy, this is very, very serious problem. And then caution in approaching the new technology on the part of women. We know that the trajectory at the beginning doesn't see women as a subject that access to new technology in the first phase. They become in the second phase of the diffusion of new technologies, and in the third, but not in the first. And this has a lot of consequences, as we will see later. Technology and communication. Why women have been slow in approaching new technologies? But there is a myth of an alleged hostility by women towards technology. In reality, this is not true at all. Women perceive that new technology were also an attack to their recognized communication capacity, which is stronger than men, than the capacity that men have. All the research done by linguists on this topic showed that. And also, these new technologies were designed essentially for men. If you remember the first mobile phone, or the computer at the beginning, or the internet at the beginning, they had this target inscribed inside the technology. I remember that a lot of designers were asking us, please suggest us a service for women, some service for women, because they wanted to capture the women's market. But it is not like that, things work. Despite and all these, despite the fact that women, historically speaking, had been crucial in shaping democratic techniques or biotechniques. You remember the analysis done by Mumford, for example, who said that the technologies invented by women were technology really democratic, really for all. Think to the ceramics, think to the plate where we eat, think to the thing to cook, think to all this kind of technique invented and designed by women are for all, not only for women. The other open question, women's bodies become the largest battlefield. As more women are reclaiming their determination and acquire power over themselves, the more the model that is conveyed by the media is the opposite. A woman focused on sexuality and pleasure to the man, compliant and available. So the more in the real life women are strong, acquire political, social, cultural strength, the more the media depict the women as the opposite, always smiling, very available, very sexy, very compliant towards the man. Attack to women's integrity. Also on the being mother topic. If a woman does not become a mother, her life has no meaning. One of the main objectives of a feminist movement was we want to have all the children we want, when we want, and if we want. There was that if we want, because we wanted to recognize also the right to not have any children. Having children is must not be an obligation for women. But from that moment to now, a lot of rhetorics came out about this, fundamental necessity to have a child. If you don't have a child, and then the availability by all the women to do a lot of things to have a child, even if you are 60 years old, even if you are very, ill, but this is a must. You cannot live without. This is terrible. And there is a lot of complicity about that by the medical class, by policy, by a lot of different subjects. And then a terrible way of violence against women, rapes, beating, etc. However, the power of women has increased practically in all the sphere of social life. But the women have continued to struggle and to express forms of resistance at home, as well at work, in the educational environment, everywhere, as well in the media, but not in organized way, spontaneous. Even if all this kind of resistance is a mass resistance, but it is in a spontaneous form. One main terrain of the refusal of housework is the birth rate that is really down. And this is, this picture shows how the resistance, women's resistance expressed, because giving birth to a child means a lot of work. A way to reduce housework is to reduce the number of children. Of course, it is a kind of resistance in defensive. It's not a resistance in attack, but this is what is happening. Also, women continue to invest in their future. Mothers free their daughter of a part of housework. Daughters study more than brothers. In several European countries, women have educational qualification higher than men. We are more educated, better educated than men. We are best than men in the university, at school, in high school, everywhere. The problem is not at the educational level. The problems come out when women go in the labor market, because labor market is hostile against women. At that moment, we are not able to spend what we gain in the educational setting. Although all these limitations, these problems which are open, we are still open. The world has become definitely a better place to live for women. So this is, undiscussable. Women have gained much more social and legal rights and a more positive and authoritative social identity. Women have also gained much more mobility than in the past. Social mobility and geographical mobility, both. Because social mobility in the sense that women now, there are a lot of women who are doctors, who are academics, more than in the past, who are in many different positions. But also geographical mobility. It was quite difficult for women to move alone. We don't have so many women travelers alone in the world. But then we have gained a lot of more degree of freedom in geographical mobility. But what happened in the meantime? As Jacques Ellul, I don't know the pronunciation, had foreseen in 64, underline the date, a strong machinization of the everyday life has happened. Marx's lessons cannot help us in understanding the meaning of this process, as his focus was the factory. Despite what he thought and he wrote, so about the increase of machines and the parallel reduction of workers, in the domestic sphere, another story began. Here, billions of people use machines that they own. Do you remember all the polemics that Marx raised about these capitalist entrepreneurs who are the owners of the means of production? Now we have a lot of people who are owners of means of production. Let us look about the genealogy of machinery in the everyday life. They include different kind of machines. They include the means of transport, domestic appliances, ICTs. Domestic appliances which address material housework, ICTs, immaterial housework. In some cases, men were the first users, means of transport. In other cases, women were house appliances. Both gender almost simultaneously accessed the mass media, radio and television, newspapers, more men. Children and adolescents, certain new media, the video recorder, gaming consoles and video games. Of course, the access to these technologies reflected several factors: hierarchy of power, division of labor and cooperation of labor in the housework, life cycle. It depends from, you are elderly or you are young or adult, and also on the interpersonal dynamics and different tastes. But there is this hierarchy of power in the access to these technologies. But what is important to stress is that while the means of transportation were clearly derived for the core factory tradition, so they are machine as the machine done inside and used inside the factories. The domestic appliances are the result of a secondary fallout of the noble evolution of the large industrial sectors in the domestic sphere. In fact, the domestic appliances are few, are basic, and they, for a lot of time, we keep them like they are, without any improvement. This slow penetration of domestic appliances was accompanied by a series of integrated processes: the social construction of the figure of the housewife, a rigid division of labor among men and women, the development and imposition of the cultural hegemony by capitalist society, the development of telecommunication technologies such as telephone, radio, television, and so on. The reason for this slow penetration of technologies in the houses was also due to another factor, which is very important, that women's body, with their capacity to work almost illimitably, and then the body of the various family members, are already machines. They are natural machines that are working in the domestic sphere. And because of this, if I have a natural machine, why I had to produce machine that cost to me? I don't pay them, they are free, so I take and stop. So I'm not pushed to develop technology for the domestic setting. And this also explain why the domestic setting has remained in a large substratum of pre-industrialization in daily life regarding the material housework. But how domestic appliances arrived in the home? Because they represented a symbolic operation through which industrial developers put forward a positive and fruitful image of progress after the disasters of the Second World War and Hiroshima. This is clearly documented by the historian of technologies. And this is really interesting to be stressed. The United States started this in 1920, soon after women needed to be installed as domestic managers, as Roland Marchand's excellent book shows, Advertising the American Dream. So they came for this reason, essentially. They had to rebuild an image, you know, positive image after the disaster of the Second World War. There is a double character of care work and housework in which the domestic sphere seems to belong seems to belong to the natural world, although in reality it conceals the true process of valorization which take place within this sphere. This double character, even if it is very crucial to hold up the game, makes difficult the political management of this reproductive sphere, because all of these processes suffered from closed door syndrome. What does it mean? How I'm the state, how can enter in the houses? I develop this think of privacy. What is inside the house cannot involve me. I don't want to be involved because these, for a series of reasons, okay? So how can open that door and come in order to control what is happening there? And of course, because if I'm not able to control, there are negative implications. Its functioning, how the domestic world function, can be done only ex ante, after, outside the domestic process itself, when the labor force arrive where? At school, at work, etc. And then I can see if they are dressed in the right way, if they are clean, if they are fed up well, if they live well and they are reproduced well, okay? I cannot go inside. For a long time, the social services were able to anticipate the control only during the process itself, only in the areas of social exclusion, marginalization, and poverty. The only situation in which somebody from the state could open the door and say, what are you doing? You know, what is the problem? I'm here to check, to control. But this problem has been overcome with the ICTs, which were coming differently from transport, means of transportation and domestic appliances, which were coming from the most advanced world of innovation. Here we are at the top of technology and innovative technology. Their advent in our houses has represented a great technical, social, and political resource which have been used in order to overcome the difficulties of exerting control over the domestic environment. Meyerowitz in 1985, in his book No Sense of Place, depicts how television indirectly control a lot of things happening inside the house and influence these. These technologies are in fact able, the new technologies, the internet, mobile, blah, blah, are in fact able to put people in contact with the external world through most invisible means, through electricity, electromagnetic waves, etc. So, in another way, invisible. ICTs were able to overcome the problem of the closed door by being submitted to the same process of commodification to which both means of transportation and domestic appliances were submitted. So with ICTs, there was a decision that was taken with the internet, the mobile, all this kind of ICTs. So how can we deal with these? Because they are also very powerful, and very powerful in the hands of people. It is also a danger. But at the end, it was decided their commercialization to transform them in product to be sold to people. They became goods which entered into the market and were available to purchase and subject to the purchasing power of consumers and then their will. For the first time, all these types of technology were available to and owned by the masses, but which is different from old media, because old media also entered in a lot of houses, but people could only use them, consume them, be audiences. In this case, no. People can use them and produce with them, be active. And this is another story. Use them for their interest. This opens another story. Once in the house, ICTs function as instrument of housework, and they are able to standardize the process of immaterial reproduction, making the immaterial reproduction uniform and homogeneous. Immaterial reproduction, what is communication, education, affection, sex, consolation, emotion, this sphere. As they are invisible, they penetrate and intrude upon all the folds of daily life. They have a capacity of penetration in the ritualization of our daily life, which is very, very deep, profound. If Tronti's analysis of class composition is applied to the contemporary multitude, which now deal with a great fragility of class awareness. People reveal instead the great homogeneity of a particular technical collocation, which is that of being an audience. This, paradoxally, this is what is able to unify people. And this is what technically collocate people in the same level, being audience. Being an audience, being users, ICTs users. ICTs and the various work processes that they support in the household represent the various parts of a big assembly line. We cannot see now, I would say, the real assembly line, the real big and most important assembly line is the assembly line which is in the houses, which is in the domestic sphere, which is not in the factory. Of course, it is important how the technological level of the factory, how the factory works, but this is much more important because it is much more inclusive of all the population. How are ICTs? They are, we had the Marisol presentation and Des presentation and the other presentation. They are not so automatically democratic. Of course, they are power-centered, authoritarian technologies. Internet is even of military derivation. Like the old mass media, they present themselves differently, but the structure is like that. These characteristics attempt to shape the domestic field and everyday life with a military logic. Why we think military is a very engaging work, but think of the immobility which they cause among audiences and users. They were able to discipline. Like in an army, people sit down. Children sit down hours and hours and hours. Young people sit down 10 hours a day. So what is more, also politically, consoling that a young person who plays video games for hours and hours, stay at home, very controllable, very disciplined, and or also a lot of activists that are online 4 hours a day, and they are convinced to have changed the world. In my class, we were surprised because one activist, one of my students, who is an activist, she told us, I was online, she was involved against the law about university that the Berlusconi government did, and which provoked a lot of movement, occupation in a lot of universities in Italy, a big movement. And she said, I did a lot of things. Then it was 8 o'clock. I closed down my computer and I realized I was alone at home. She was alone at home. She was divided physically from the other. To do politics, you need to be physically present with the others in some places. In the big city, you need to raise your voice. Internet is a written world, mainly a written world. You write, politics need the voice very high that, are in the street, are in the square, are in front of the building of power. Without that, your engagement is limited and with a lot of problems, because in the virtual, of course, there is a lot of power also in the internet, and it has a lot of influence also in the political life. But if you don't arrive to that moment, this is very limited. With new media, which are increasingly being designed and vivified by users, immaterial labor in the reproductive sphere has become mediated, self-reproductive, self-exploiting, and self-disciplinary. We have, in this concern, the analysis of Terra Nova, for example, who says that people online work without being paid. We have also Barthes. Barthes is an old French scholar who in the 60s was made in a very interesting difference between writers with the double capital W, so the real writers, and then the writers with the lowercase w, which are the writers that write for pleasure because they like to write. But nobody asked them to work for write for work. And he analyzed this relationship, no? In a very, in my vision, in a very interesting way. But let us go ahead because intellective machines have spread in great numbers and variety by deeply modifying the organization of space and work in houses, and also influencing the possibility of cooperation among the members of a family. We have several research here about intergenerational solidarity, for example. There is not only the bad, but also the good, in the sense that young generation help elderly, their grandfather, grandmother, or the parents to learn how to deal with this new technology. But if we compare the domestic appliances with ICTs, we should underline this point. First, technology, which should be designed to perform many of the material tasks of housework, is both very difficult to realize and is aimed at a section of a population with limited purchasing power inside the family. Formalizing domestic work in a technological level, at a technological level, is really a mess. It's very difficult, if not impossible. Scientists say this because it is a very complex work. Is a very complex work, and the house is a very complex setting. So, for example, producing some robots that clean the house in a very effective way is very difficult. We have nowadays a Roomba, but we must work a lot in order to, prepare the house in a way that the house can accept the Roomba and can work. So if I have to work an hour before to make the Roomba working, maybe I do in a short time by myself. So it is not so. But there is objective difficulties in that, because of this complexity. About the materiality of housework, which is cleaning, ironing, cooking, taking off the powder, etc. In contrast, the technology which is related to immaterial labor is much easier to produce, and also it is less expensive. And here there is a big development, so aimed to the immaterial part of the domestic labor. Domestic appliances succeed in reducing the time of housework. Okay, then the time liberated was used in another way, but at least they were able to do that. In contrast, ICTs have increased the time which is dedicated to communication itself. And here there will be a very long discussion to raise about a ritualization, a rigidity of the, take for example, we make an example. If I have to tell a friend about a story, okay, I can say this in 10 minutes. If I'm very good as a speaker, I can use half an hour or an hour. It depends, okay? It depends from me. it depends from my friend, if she has time, blah, blah, blah. So it depends from a lot of factors, okay? But if I want to see a story produced as a movie, for example, I have 2 hours. This is fixed, 2 hours. So not less and even not more. So 2 hours, and everything is made standardized, made much more rigid. We cannot escape to that. And a lot of different, and also ritualization. Because if I have to see a movie, generally, I see the movie in the evening, etc. The story I can tell in the morning, when I'm walking, in a many different situations. Although it is difficult to demonstrate that ICTs have ameliorated the quality of life, of course they have. But they have also, you know, as Des said yesterday, they had also other kind of consequences. So it is very variable, very articulated, the discourse about that. What is easy to demonstrate is that after the introduction of ICTs, people began working more. We work more and more intensively. Let us see a conference. We follow the person who is talking. Maybe we tweet some comment. Maybe, you know, we do a lot of things at the same time. And so this multitasking also provokes a lot of intensity of work. Whilst domestic appliances have been a symbolic operation, ICTs represent the point of convergence of 2 different leading industrial traditions, informatics and media technology. So we are at the top of innovation there. Where the use of domestic appliances was promoted mainly to women who were pushed to act as gatekeepers and be responsible for the entire process of housework, ICT tend, after initially being aimed at white, young, rich men, to be more ecumenical, so to be addressed to all. So a lot of men still today in front of a washing machine have some problems, okay? It's not a machine that they feel friend, okay? But all of us, we are more or less accessing ICTs now, okay? Of course, women are a little less than men, are a little after the men in accessing, but they are more ecumenical because they have been designed to address all the market. The 5th point, you have, I finish in a while. Increasing the number and types of ICTs was the only way to sustain the expansion of immaterial labor in the reproductive sphere. This expansion was fundamental to expand the communication, the education, the information, the emotion, you know, all these kind of things, because we need a lot of the material labor infused on ourselves to cope with the complexity of globalization and with the growing portion of reproduction that we must express, we must take care. The last point, however, the increase was also the result of a grassroots initiative which promoted self-determination in the areas of feeling, affection, sex, education, and so forth. So take the internet. The internet was designed in a certain way. Then people pressing, for example, on online newspapers, pushed media group to create the forum. Then the forum was not corresponding because was a place managed by these webmaster that impose some rules, so blah blah. People went and create blogs. Okay, blogs, a very big development of blogs. Then people understood that, okay, this was very good for their self-expression, but then nobody went to see what they were writing. So social networks. So all these kind of things means that, you know, people have designed a lot of what the internet is today. ICTs represent a good resource also for managing and establishing control over the most precious part of people, the affectivity and the imagination. The last point, although the opposite may seem to be true, immaterial labor is the fulcrum of the entire domestic process. So the domestic process doesn't initiate from the materiality, but from the immateriality. In fact, when we have a love affair with somebody, it is all immaterial, you know, oh, expression of our affection, blah, blah, blah. And it is at a certain point that the materiality of the domestic labor come at stake. In conclusion, the political economy of the domestic sphere continue to have this double strategy. A great deal of technology applied to immaterial labor, a very much less technology applied to the material labor. This bifurcation is necessary to maintain a high level of value production in everyday life. But in this situation plays a big part also the block of the transmission of feminine social role by mothers to the daughter. So what also have blocked the value production in everyday life is that mother at certain point decided to not teach daughter how to clean the house, how to cook, how to... The new generation know very few about all these process. And these preserve them, in a certain sense, from working and doing domestic work. There is a final point that also is related to what Des said yesterday. Immaterial labor not only creates value in the process of reproduction of the labor force, but also generates directly capital. One only needs, think for example of Facebook, Twitter, MySpace. MySpace doesn't exist anymore, but this kind of social network. They are basically enterprises which extract value directly from sociability, friendship, and emotion for producing capital. At least Aaron Fisher in 2011 clarified this important notion definitively. And it was really important also to young people. Facebook is a social network. No, Facebook is an enterprise. So highlight this notion was really very important. I would say I stop here, and if there is some, I don't know, some question, comment. Thank you.
Please raise your hands if there are questions. No, I might venture one. So, following your interpretation, the introduction of household appliances in a way had effect of increasing the importance or the work that the housework does for productive sphere. What was the effect? So in a way, it didn't decrease the housework. It increased the housework and thus allowed more to be invested in the labor force that would come to the gates of the factory, as you said. So in that way, it made it more fit for the production process. But then, what would be the effect of ICTs on the productive labor, in your view, and the introduction of the ICTs into the household, in that sense?
I'm not sure to have understand your question. So,
you said that the introduction of appliances did not reduce the housework. It basically
it has reduced, but then the work free from them was immediately used for other things.
Yes. So that would, in a way, increase the amount of reproductive work that goes into maintaining labor or labor force. And in that sense, labor force would be more fit to enter the production process. So what would be the effect of the introduction of ICTs into the home on the fitness of labor in the in the process of production?
I think we work more and more intensively. This is the effect. Said in with few words, we work more for more time and more intensively. Of course, how do we make research on that? There is the research on budget time. No, you ask people how much time do you dedicate to the work outside the house? How much time to dedicate to the work in your house? How much time for traveling? All these kind of things. But people, many times, they are not aware of what is, how to define some activities. They are work, they are leisure, for example, they are amusement, they are entertainment, you know, they are not able to figure out really. And you have ridiculous data coming from the research done on these, with this methodology. So there is also a problem of methodology, of a solid, robust methodology to be applied to see really. It is my impression, you know, there is a problem of overload. There is a lot of literature about that, in any case, that talk in this direction. But empirical research to see this need to be done with other methodology, new methodology.
The last sentence and the conclusion is intriguing me, and then it maybe can be connected to the question that Tommy made, and to try to find an exit. Well, okay, the ICT gadgets, activities, and the whole thing. They're basically enterprises which extract value directly from sociability, friendship, and emotion for producing capital. Do you mean, or did the Fisher, whoever it is, meant on a profit, capital in the sense of profit? So, okay, here we are now in exploiting, again, some basic human, let's say women's in this case, capabilities, potentials, human potentials, in a similar way as Marx explained the appearance of the surplus value through the labor, because it's not only producing with the means of the production and the time, but it's also some essential human capacities which are being wasted. Are they wasted into somebody else's profit? Are they in a similar way wasted in here? Or could we be a little bit more generous? Because if it is so, if technology is what has brought us to here, although it seems like it's making the life of women, okay, let's stay with the domestic sphere, made it easier, created the free space, and then this created free space, let's say, which should have been used for, I don't know, creative activities, more sociabilities, more friendships, or more or whatever, has actually been filled with the new technologies, which almost seems like they've been invented to even capture this just created free space. So can we just really in the same way talk about these new technologies in the exploitative function, although, okay, the capital and the profit is being created, or can we still think, as I said, a little bit gentler towards them? Actually, it connects to all the earlier panels, and then now is the question: what do those new technologies really will finish the mankind in that sense? In the Heideggerian sense, you know, technology will overcome the whole human capacities and politics and eat up everything, or
they produce capital. Think, for example, Facebook, how much money they do with this kind of game, this kind of platform that they were able to put on, I don't know, to build.
Yeah, I know, but if I look at what kind of my personal capacities and abilities I have invested and wasted, it's still, I wonder whether to be complete pessimist or whether to say, okay, it's still better than wasting it in a sheerly mechanical material labor, like industrial work or the way the housework was before, where there was a sheer investment. Okay, there was some creativity and control of the process and so on, but actually the alienation came from taking all the human capacities through the repetitive, simple, boring housework. Now, I mean, if I create the recipe, okay, I cannot cook on the Facebook, unfortunately, but I can order. Okay, I'm trying to see how it finishes. I mean, how to think about it, with some optimism or entirely pessimistic.
No. I'm never pessimistic, but I think that we have to look at the reality as it is. I would say that when we talk about sociability, friendship, emotion, we talk about reproductive labor. We don't do activity, communication. I don't agree to define communication as an act, as many scholars are calling, or an activity. I speak about communication as a labor. We understand their statute, their essence, if we think that we are in front of, we are working, you know, for ourselves, for the other, but we are working. It is a reproductive labor which we express there. And there are people, there are Facebook, Twitter, etc., that are making money, producing capital, exploiting this reproductive labor. Because if we did not invest our time, our energy in that place, they could not make this money. And their idea, their original, between bracket, idea was to exploit this kind of part of reproductive labor which no one before thought to do in that way. But you know, everything is also, can also possibly change. It depends on how users want to experiment also different relationship with the internet, with also these firms. Never. Technology is never neutral, I think.
Hi. Thank you a lot for this thrilling lecture. Yes, I'm thinking a lot about the mechanization of everyday life, and maybe especially about the possible differences between certain kinds of material household labor and those parts of it that are more about care of children and so on, and the parts of technology in this. Where to begin? I will try to formulate two questions. Yeah, at the moment I'm researching the history of tape recorders. So I'm looking, for example, at advertisements for tape recorders from the 60s in Sweden. And that was a time when the division of labor in Swedish families were beginning to change a little bit. Fathers were taking over a little bit more responsibility for taking care of the kids. And it's so striking how the advertisements for tape recorders market tape recorders as an opportunity for fathers to reduce their part of household labor. They instruct fathers to, instead of reading stories for their kids at the evening, they could record the stories at a tape recorder and leave the tape recorder in the room with the kids. And then they can go to their office and work instead. This was middle-class men, of course, that could buy tape recorders. So this made me think a lot about the role of ICTs in the gender division of household labor. Because I don't think that many men really did like they were instructed in the advertisements. I mean, it's a bit absurd to leave kids just with a tape recorder, and in the end, I mean, someone would be with them, probably a woman. And then if we go to today, we see in surveys of Swedish digital media usage how parents of small children are by far the huge users of tablets, like the iPad. The tablet has really become the accessory for the parents of small children and a way to reduce household labor. You put a video game in the hands of the children and let them play Angry Birds, so you don't have to look up for them so much. And that's actually happening, Rod, which I mean, that it's, even though I think you have an important point that you can, it's very hard to measure the actual use of time in families, but it's obvious that it's happening. So, and that is also, of course, followed by a general debate about the moral implications of this. Is it okay to leave our kids with iPad for so much time? And partly it's just the same thing as with television or video games, but this debate points somehow to the idea of a limit for how much you can rationalize the household. I mean, if we take cooking or cleaning, we can maybe hypothetically think that there is a limitless potential for mechanization, that you can reduce household labor very much. Okay, not limitless, but it's not moral. Yeah, but it's not the same moral limit as when it comes to children. So every now and then this moral debate comes up. Should we leave children with computers? And it's usually not framed in a feminist way. So how should we, as feminists, intervene in the debate of a possible moral limit for the use of entertainment media for our kids? That's my first question. Okay, you can take.
The right answer to you. I want to say something. So the video, you were saying that you are studying the video recorder.
Tape recorders, audio.
Tape recorder, audio. There was not time to deep this question about immaterial and material labor. We said that at the beginning it is the immaterial labor which is the most important one, but then once it is set up, the material labor come and become more important. In a lot of research, we saw that, for example, I'm a mother, I finish to work, I go to pick up the children at school, I go at home, okay? I have everything to do, my husband maybe is somewhere, I have to cook, I have to deal with what I can do. I put the children in front of the television, I put some program for them, and I do the materiality. I know that it would be much better if I sit down on the sofa and I look with them, you know, I don't know, a cartoon, and comment with them. But then the dinner, who does the dinner? I have the responsibility also of the dinner. So the materiality of the housework, the overall organization of the functioning of a house become predominant on all this. Then, of course, they told me, research scholars, people told me, media, that, you know, there must be a limit, but I must negotiate this limit with the limit that I have, also with all the organization of all the situation. What this debate came out at the beginning of the computer diffusion and the internet. And it would be nice to reconstruct all the phases that and the negotiation into the house, because the computer became as a male technology. The problem for women were where to put these in the house, because, for example, in Italian house, the delay in accepting the computer at home is that women didn't like the computer because it was LED, it was not good, not beautiful. It was what I put in the dining room, no. In the kitchen, no. And it finished to go in the bedroom of the child. This was the situation, but there was a resistance by women because of but it came as a male instrument, and the men use a lot this instrument, you know, also to escape a little bit from housework. A lot, we had research about that. The husband was doing this incredible thing, novelty in the house, and you know, and it was a way to not to do. But then at that time also, that children, especially male at the beginning, went to use the computer. The problem was that the computer, staying with the computer, is something that you can read through the theory of flusso. How do you say flusso in English? Eh? Fluxes. Teoria del flusso. In the sense that you are so inside the thing that you lose the sense of the time, of the place, no? And this was happening very clearly to children. So women had to stop at a certain point, and there was a lot of discussion, an hour a day, 2 hours a day, what was the time. I don't have an answer for you about, you know, a feminist understanding. I don't know. There are a lot. No, I don't know if the other women here have an answer more clear at this proposal. We know that too many hours in front of a computer provoke the increasing of obesity, a lot of things. And then children lose the capacity to communicate, to be the dialogue, now to be capable to handle the co-present communication, because they don't talk for hours and hours. They are silent because this is a silent world. And I don't know.
Okay, we need to finish soon, so one last question.
I'm a little bit skeptical about that whole exploitation of labor on Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, and it's used quite a lot. And I think that if we make it into the flat kind of into the same kind of level with other exploitations, that maybe when we see how it doesn't work, maybe we can just weaken our argument in some other areas, for example, domestic labor. So just to say, for example, Facebook is now seen as exploitation because it didn't start in charging people to use it. Because if they did that, then they would need to get some money to run that infrastructure and whatever, and no one would really say, because no one is now talking about the phone system as something which is actually exploiting people because they pay for that. Or like in a restaurant or in any of these infrastructures where where people are charged, they pay for the service. And for sure we can say that there is sociability, there is some kind of symbolic capital which goes there. So if you're a hipster and make some, I don't know, a cafe bar super popular, then you can say, oh, whatever I do here and all of my reputation is actually adding value to that cafe bar. So basically they just exploit. So I'm not sure if that really works. And then at the end also, when we go and see how much they exploit, it doesn't again sound super convincing. So Facebook just in last quarter of this year got something like 6 billion. So it's not even for the whole year that they are getting to the 6 billion revenue. And that's less than, for quite some time, it was less than $1 per month, you know, like less than like $0.50 per month. So basically when you then say to someone that Facebook just exploited you for a month and made like 40 cents in that month for your labor there, I don't think that it sounds convincing. I think that we should come up with something more convincing, because there are many issues with these kind of whatever constellations. But I'm not sure that a labor and exploitation is the most convincing one.
Yeah, but labor, I'm sure, that this labor is a reproductive labor, you know, that we are doing to reconstruct our energy, our sphere, sociability sphere in that way. Maybe I can agree with you that maybe we can add another thing, maybe soft exploitation or another kind of adjective. I don't have here ready a solution, because in reality is what this is similar to what Roland Barthes said. There are these writers with the lowercase w, which are not required by anyone to write. They write, and but you know, there is a difference. I agree with you. There is a difference if I work for somebody, we have a contract, I produce a thought, you, the entrepreneur, count on my work, which is defined, and what we are doing on Facebook. But also, it is also true that the exploitation in the information society is really variegate. I don't know if in English there is this word. It's very articulate, because there are many, many different forms of work, of precarious work, you know, atypical works, which are very not classical. So we should understand these also Facebook framework inside this larger, this broader framework of the what does it mean to work today. You had very few stable workers, and then a myriad of very different kind of form of exploitation. For example, also in the university there are people, young people that want to stay at the university, and they come to the university, they try to, you know, to help, to do something. They don't have any precise contract with the university, but they still, at the end, the university exploit them, because you use them in many different situations. So how do you define this? Nobody asked them to come, but because they are there, and it is good that they are there, because we can exploit them in many situations. So
then they have certain amount of resources, and then they hire people to do that, and then some of that is done by some others because they exploit the asymmetry of symbolic capital. So they will do that because, for example, at goldsmiths, they will just say, okay, this is a good investment because if I make it into my CV, then I will have better chances. So it's kind of investment. But on Facebook, for example, it's not really an investment. So no one will put into their CV, I was waiting my time on Facebook, you know. No one would like give you the job or whatever. There is no really that kind of notion of labor. I understand how Facebook extract value. I'm just not convinced that we should call the time which people spend on Facebook as something which is productive labor. That's what I'm kind of arguing. Not that I'm arguing anything else.
I understand. It is open, you know. It is an open question. Problem.
Okay, maybe we leave it at a disagreement. Thank you, Leopoldina. And thank you all for staying this late. Tomorrow we have, again, a full day of conference. It will be panels focusing primarily on the transformations that are happening in the newsroom, with news organizations, and in the journalist work. It starts at 11. And then in the evening, there will be a Skype talk by Robert McChesney, so that's at 7. So hope to see you tomorrow. And thank you once more.